Expressionism is our next form of music. This is the music by Arnold Schoenberg and Alban Berg. Try not to get the two confused, even though they have quite similar names, because their music is very different. Expressionism, very much like Impressionism, was an artistic movement of the 20th century. But unlike Impressionism, Expressionism sought to give a very specific expression to the evil and dark side of human nature, versus Impressionism that simply wanted to exploit the ideas and atmosphere of the more beautiful sides of human nature and nature itself. There were composers in the 20th century that were very influenced and very affected by the wars and the upheaval of the era. They became obsessed with exploring humanity through music and how they wrote music, especially that darker side of human nature. Expressionism, therefore, is an attempt by composers to explore inner feelings, more true feelings about the beautiful and horrific events of the century, rather than trying to depict those events superficially, to only show an outward appearance of understanding. They wanted to reject conventional prettiness of music and instead shock and stun their audiences with the ugliness of the topics they chose and the ugliness of the music itself. They wanted to reach deep down and use music as a social protest. For example, they would try to depict the bloodshed in war or the murder and evil that happens in society to try and get people thinking about and trying to fix these terrible events. Composers that were considered expressionists believed that music had the power to evoke emotion, to touch the human soul, and then also to bring about solutions to these dark, terrible things that were happening in society. They wanted to use music to change society and to change people at their core. Some of us believe that's possible, and some of us do not. Think about whether you believe music has the power to change a human being or to change their life or circumstance. That particular question is one that expressionist composers ask in every piece of music they write. Many composers over the past century have written expressionist music. It's a type of music, much like program music, that became popularized in the sense that many composers saw that it had power and meaning and tried to use at least some level of expressionism in their music. But the two first and most influential composers of expressionist music were Arnold Schoenberg and Alban Berg. Remember that expressionist music used extreme edges of ranges and registers. It used strange instrumental and vocal effects, including effects invented by the composers writing the music, and it did not use any tonality. Expressionist music almost always was atonal or used a 12-tone system. Expressionist music also stressed fragmentation, the breaking down of beauty, the breaking down of ideas of conscious thought into madness. I just wanted to give you a few examples of expressionist art. One perhaps creepy, the other quite beautiful. But it's up to you to express your emotions and how these paintings evoke those emotions. The first painting of the masks is a picture of African masks. All of these masks represent some part of the human soul and emotion and are used in ritualistic dances of death in African cultures. The other picture is of flowers, a much more nice and natural phenomenon, but even these flowers have a very strange boldness to them that almost screams of the brightness and the strangeness of the eyes in the center of the flowers. These are expressionist paintings, very much like the expressionist music you'll hear in the listening examples, in that they evoke dark emotions, powerful emotions, and try to shock you with the vividness of what they try to portray. Arnold Schoenberg, the first of the composers we'll talk about when it comes to expressionist music, lived from 1874 to 1951. In 1908, after writing music for a number of years, Schoenberg, because of his studies and his thoughts on music and what it really meant to create music abandoned tonality completely. He was the first composer in the modern era to do so. He believed you didn't need tonality or balance in music, and instead, over the course of a 20-year period, from 1908 until about 1928, developed the 12-tone system of music, the mathematical system in which every single tone in a musical scale, chromatically, is equal to one another. So there's no need for the more beautiful sense of melody and harmony and balance in music. Schoenberg created this new system because he believed that music was limited when it was balanced and tonal. He wanted to be able to create music that had more of a sense of expression about it, that could bring uglier topics into being and help create a sense of social protest that would move humans to be better people. Schoenberg was German and lived in Germany until the Nazis took power before the Second World War, Because of his Jewish faith, he was forced to flee to the United States, but he did get a job at UCLA until his death in 1951. He always missed his home and was very heavily influenced and affected by what happened to the Jewish culture during World War II. Schoenberg never limited himself to one style of music during his life, and he developed quite a few new styles, including the 12-tone system and expressionist music. He was also inspired by the Romantics, but moved far beyond the sounds of that era. His music captures you and horrifies you all at the same time. So now it's time for the first listening example for expressionism. This is a piece of music by Arnold Schoenberg called Pierrot Lunaire, Opus 21. Translated, that means Moonstruck Pierrot. Pierrot, you can think of him as a clown, almost a mime, some sort of strange circus-like person. And he's a poet. This strange clownish poet becomes intoxicated as moonlight floods the still horizon, and he starts to dream about desires horrible and sweet. The song that you're going to listen to, the first song, Mondestrunken, which means moon drunk, is the first song of a song cycle including 21 songs. These songs are influenced by Romantic art songs, but sound nothing like the art songs of Franz Schubert. These songs are, instead of scored for voice and piano, scored for voice, piano, flute, violin, and cello. They are completely atonal and intentionally have no sense of key whatsoever and no sense of balance. Schoenberg wanted to be able to create new types of sound and vocal effect, so he created a new technique called Sprechstimme, which literally translates as speech song. This style of song speech was developed by Schoenberg in order to create bent pitches and emphasize contrasted, jagged melodies. For him, a way to create expression in music was to make it more jagged, sharp, strange to the ear, so that you were captivated enough to listen to the stories being told. The song you're going to listen to, Moondrunk, is the moment at which Pierrot sees the moon, is struck so vividly by it that he's entirely intoxicated to the point where he becomes completely drunk and starts to hallucinate and dream about his desires. The rest of the songs, then, are about those horrible and sweet desires that he imagines, dreams, and hallucinates. It's a strange topic. It's one that's fantastical, much like the Romantic topics, yet it's one that really speaks to trueness of humanity. So many people get drunk and lose themselves in hallucinations and desires, lose their inhibitions. This is a story of Pierrot losing his inhibitions and getting lost in his dreams, since he's drunk on the moonlight in the forest. See whether you can really hear the atonality and the use of Sprechstimme in this story. Does it help to express the story to you? Does it give you a feeling in this first song of being drunk because the pitches are bent and sort of spoken? Can you hear the fragmentation of the melody, The fact that sometimes it sounds like we're going to get a beautiful melody and it simply stops or repeats itself or stutters. How does this song embody expressionism? This is one of the first examples of expressionism ever written by Schoenberg. You're going to listen to next another piece by Schoenberg, which is an even better example of expressionism. The second listening example for expressionism by Arnold Schoenberg was called A Survivor from Warsaw, written in 1947 after the close of the Second World War. It's a cantata, and if you remember back to the Baroque period, we talked about what a cantata is. If you need to remind yourselves, feel free to look that term back up. The narrator part is actually the most specific and most important, and also is what makes this an expressionist piece of music. The narrator tells us a story of how the Nazis treated Jews in occupied Poland, in particular in a ghetto in Poland. The narrator describes and reads letters from a man trapped in the ghetto, watching his colleagues and friends and family being murdered, hearing the screams of the German soldiers as they separate the Jews to send them to the concentration camps, and also reads eventually a Hebrew prayer, which is very shocking to hear at the end of a piece of music that's all about the terrible parts of human nature. This piece is meant to be shocking in the extreme. It's supposed to get audiences thinking about what happened during the World War and hopefully trying to find a way to never let it happen again. The way this piece of music is created, the subject, and then how it is performed, all of these aspects are fundamentally expressionistic. I'm not sure I can say enjoy listening to this piece of music, but make sure that you set aside a good 10 minutes to listen to this and take it seriously when you listen to expressionist music. All of these topics are worth really contemplating, but don't let them ruin your day either. Think about them, let them affect you, and then move on to some more lighter styles. Because remember that life is not only about the dark forms and the dark ideas, the dark side of human nature, but about the light and beautiful. Hence why we get such varied styles as Impressionism and Expressionism. Alban Berg is also a very important expressionist composer, so we've got to talk about him for just a moment. He was born in Vienna and had quite a short life. He lived from 1885 to 1935 only. He wrote almost entirely atonal and expressionistic music. Interestingly, he was a student of Arnold Schoenberg and was, of course, very inspired by his work. Alban Berg wrote very few works of music, but each one of them is touching, emotional, and very shocking in one way or another. He's most famous for an opera that he wrote between the years of 1917 and 1922 called Wozzeck. It was written during Berg's time in the Austrian army during World War I. He based it loosely on a play from the 1830s, but really was inspired and affected by so many things in the World War that he was able to combine that base of the play with new libretto and ideas of his own to create an amazingly strange, dark, and expressionist opera. The listening examples that you have labeled listening example 3 and 4 are the last examples you'll listen to that are expressionists for this week. These examples are from Wozzeck. The required listening is Act 3, Scenes 4 and 5, the two final scenes of the opera. I have provided a link to the full opera. It does not have English subtitles, but it's a really great production. This was such a popular opera for a time that they actually created a movie of the opera in full. If you'd like to see it with English subtitles, it's possible to find every single scene of the opera, every single scene from this movie production, online with English subtitles. It's simply that there's not one full link to the whole opera. So go ahead and look for it. All you have to do is type in Wozzeck English subtitles, and you should be able to find some good clips from the opera if you wish to see more of it than the required listening. The story itself is expressionist. It's the story of a soldier who's driven to madness by society. It leads him to murder his wife and then drown himself because he's trying to wash the blood from his hands after he murders her. He leaves behind his small son, orphaned of both parents. It's a terribly tragic story, but one that speaks to the post traumatic stress of so many of the soldiers coming out of the world wars. His opera uses speaking, shrieking, Sprechstimme, distorted folk songs, extremes of range, dynamic, and register in voices and the orchestra. It is very difficult to perform. It's very complicated music, but it really speaks to the darkness of the human soul sometimes and gets all of us thinking about how we can help each other be better people and combat depression, murder, evil, suicide, bullying, so many dark aspects of human nature that we can change if only we strive to.